Welcome to today's webinar on the top 3 services industry predictions and the future of services quoting. I'm Lindsey Doucette and I'm the moderator for today's webinar. We have an exciting and informative session planned for you today featuring Mahesh Baxi, our co-founder and CEO of Provus. Thanks, Mahesh, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. Looking forward to it.
Of course. All right. So before we get started, I do just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So first, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all of you guys after the event. Second, we will answer as many questions as we can at the end. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, just make sure to submit those in the Q&A panel box at the bottom of your screen. And then just wanted to go over with you guys today just a quick agenda of what will be coming today. So first, we'll go over some challenges that services organizations are facing right now, and then Mahesh will share his predictions and insights for what's to come in the industry, and then we'll end it with how Provus is helping many service organizations, followed by any time that we do have for Q&A. So Mahesh, I'll go ahead and pass it on over to you to get started.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsey. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mahesh Baxi, and I'm one of the co-founders and CEO here at Provus. Some of you who are not familiar with Provus, Provus is a purpose-built services coding automation platform. We are natively built on force.com platform and partner with Salesforce, as well as, we are partner with Oracle NetSuite from OpenAir and Suite project perspective to provide end-to-end integration. There are lots of organizations. Some of our customers are here today on the webinar. Lots of organizations who are using Provus and enjoying the benefits that comes with it, which we'll talk about as we go through the webinar. But also Provus is backed by some of the world-class venture firms, including Norvest, Excel, and Storm Ventures.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Mahesh. So can you please tell us what is happening in the services industry? There are companies which are selling services, and then there's companies that are consuming these services. So what has changed for them in the last decade, and what challenges do they have?
Yeah. So I can talk about that for 2 hours, but in the interest of time, here is what's happening, right? So this is an example of a simple lead to cash services transformation that many companies are going through. And this is just one example. I think ERP has been around for many, many decades, and we are intimately familiar with what it takes to really consume the ERP services or implement, or provide the ERP services. But some of the modern business transformations that are happening, such as lead to cash. Now, when you talk about lead to cash, as you can see, it not only goes through several process transformations, it actually cuts across the entire organization. When you think of users' perspective, when you think of process perspective, when you think of the data transformation perspective, it just absolutely critical that the blueprint of your transformation is really well thought through, right? And that has actually changed in the last decade or a couple of decades in terms of how you think of business transformation. How do you think of end-to-end business process transformation? And this is an example of a lead to cash. But when you think of procure to pay, source to cash, IT modernization, application modernizations, revenue recognition processes, I think, you just, when you think of enterprise B2B, all of the process transformation that takes place, there are a few things that have changed or what's happening, right? Well, number one, any of those process transformations or processes that you are dealing with have only become more complex. And they've become more complex because, one, it involves so many different transformations and user personas, but also it has become more complex because there are so many, solutions out there. And no longer there is a single best of the breed software that solves for everything, right? I mean, maybe 2 decades ago, ERP was everything, and whether you like it or not, you stick with it and you stay with it, right? But on back of that, what has happened, Lindsey, really is, the companies that are consuming these services, it has become more and more complex for them to consume the services. But at the same time, the companies that are selling to these services, now you could be a company who is a product company, but you require services to enable your product for your customers, Or you could be a consulting services company where you are actually involved in, either the entire transformation piece or parts of the transformation piece. And what that means really is, for these companies, they have to become like an environment aware. What I mean by environment aware is really, now you're playing a role, either the entire role or a piece of this role in the entire transformation process, which means that whatever piece you are doing, you have to really be aware of, everything that's happening on the left and right of that process, right? So that's definitely, to be seen everywhere in the enterprise these days. But then, one could argue that, okay, the processes has always been like that. And so, what has really changed? And what has really changed is, this is again a sample of, this chart could be very complex and like hundreds of companies here, but this is just to demonstrate what has really changed, which is an influx of lot of SaaS point solution companies, right? I mean, and for all the right reasons. The last decade or 12 years or so, we have seen an influx of lot of SaaS point solution companies out there, which is doing fantastic, which are solving a very key problem that belongs to that entire end-to-end transformation that we talked about. But what does that mean? What has it done, right, for us? What it has done is it has really given us like a disparate systems, because of the complexity of the entire transformation and how each of the point solutions are actually solving this problem. Lots of applications to deal with, lots of logins and user experiences to deal with, right? And if you are consuming services or if you are providing services, be it product or consulting, you have to be aware of all of that. You have to deal with all of that. Right. And then on back of this, as you can imagine, the data strategy and integration is like the paramount, right? I mean, you cannot get into any of these projects anymore just thinking of your silo. You have to really think of how and what you are dealing with. Where does your data kind of start and end? What do you integrate with? All of that kind of stuff. And as a result, the providing any kind of meaningful analytics remains a big challenge. And we are speaking from experience. We have talked to, hundreds of companies, including the big fours. I think, when you think of lead to cash as an example, getting any meaningful analytics has remained a really big challenge. And while analytics has remained challenged, now, everyone talks about AI, and there is a generative AI piece, and then there is the, AI ML piece. But imagining getting any actionable AI insight, is just like a distinct dream. Everyone talks about it, but when you talk about enterprise and lead to cash or any of those transformation projects, I think actionable AI is still a distinct dream. But and the last but not least, if you are a company which is providing any kind of services for your product or transformation or any kind of services, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. It takes a village to really provide accurate estimations, right, for the B2B transformation, because now it's, even if you are doing like a point solution and services for your point solution, it's not only about what it takes to implement my solution. It's about where do I fit in? How do I fit in? What does it mean for, the data part of it, the object model part of it, integration part of it, analytics part of it? Where am I going to consume the data from? Where am I going to send the data from? So it's a very, very complex environment that you are dealing with as a services company. And so as a result of that, really, Lindsey, what's happening is companies that are selling services, right, that they are facing a few challenges. To name a few, long sales cycles, because like I said, you now have to be environmentally aware, which means that you really cannot just answer a bunch of 5 questions and say, okay, it's going to cost you $500,000. It takes much more than that to really figure out what the scope is. How do you estimate these things accurately? And as a result, it ends up in the longer sales cycles. Because the process is to a large extent about services quoting is manual, error prone, it's just basically, there is no consistency that anyone can provide. I mean, it's anyone's guess in terms of how long will it take. And as we all know, services industry, the accurate estimation is a key. And documenting the scope is a foundation for any business that you do with the customers. Otherwise, it's a losing proposition, right? A lot of reliance on individuals, very poor customer experience, and the most important one is really no learning, from historic data, right? This is one of the industries in the enterprise which is still doing business on Excel spreadsheets. We have seen all kinds of Excel spreadsheets, very sophisticated one to a very, rudimentary ones. But the problem with Excel spreadsheets or any of those half-baked processes is that there's no learning from the historic data. And so if you're a company selling services, I'm sure a lot of this will resonate with you, but this is what we have heard from the industry. This is what we are seeing with our customers and prospects from the challenges perspective. Hope that helps, Lindsey.
Yeah, super helpful. A great overview of the services industry and the challenges that are coming up quite often. So we heard that you do have 3 key predictions for the services industry. We are super keen to hear what those are. So what are your predictions?
Yeah, that's great. And before I get into the predictions, just want to talk about when we talk about services and services industry, just want to level set what we mean by that, right? From a Provus perspective, the kinds of services or services industries that we go after, where we have customers, fall into, to name a few. I mean, there are other categories, but we'll talk about that. But to name a few, we talk about consulting services industry. Now, on the top end, you are talking about the big fours. But there are thousands and thousands of services companies in that mid-market to enterprise. And those consulting services companies are either partnering with software companies like Salesforce or DocuSign or such, where they are actually, they have these practice areas where they're implementing those softwares for their customers, or they are doing transformations, or they are doing outsourcing, they are doing engineering outsourcing, they are doing multi-year maintenance projects, all sorts of things, right? So you can imagine the kind of process to talk to a customer and say, okay, here is a multi-year code, is a very complex affair. Then professional services, companies such as Salesforce, which is a software company, but they require some sort of services to enable that software for their customers, right? And in that process, you have to go through the entire estimation, scoping, quoting, scenario modeling, all that kind of stuff. So that's the services, the second type of services industry we are talking about. The third one, which is interesting, is the asset-based services. The asset-based services are the companies which are selling hardware, but those hardware has multi-year recurring services that goes along with it. The examples are VMware, Palo Alto Networks, IBM, GE, and such, right? And this is a very exciting space. And believe it or not, they still do all of the services coding kind of manually on Excel spreadsheets. But the other ones are pharmaceutical services, transportation services, financial services. So again, we address to the broader industry segment, but all of that is focused towards solving for services quoting problem, which is a really big, complex problem, right? And with that, I think the exciting part for me and Provus is really, we think there are three key predictions that is going to change and transform this industry in not only just next 6 months, but also in the coming years. The number one is unification of how you sell the product and services. Now, I just gave an example of companies such as IBM, Cisco, GE, Palo Alto Networks, right? All of those companies do sell hardware. That hardware is tracked as an asset, and that asset has multi-year recurring services that goes along with it. Now, typically in the sales process, the product is kind of sophisticated. There are tools and products that are available from a CPQ standpoint. You configure your product, you price your product, you quote your product, and then guess what happens? Then all of these companies have offline manual Excel-based processes to actually say, okay, what is it going to take to do services? Now, if you imagine from a customer perspective, that's a very, very bad experience because one, there are delays of all kinds. I don't get to see my total cost of ownership. I don't get to really do the deal unless I understand what will it take for each of my asset and services that goes along with it. This is where Provus comes in, right? And Provus actually beautifully come and sit alongside of your product CPQ of sorts. And if you're selling product, we actually enable the services selling motion alongside with it and get you through the entire life cycle, right? So, and we are already seeing this in the market. There are more and more companies that we are talking to, which are looking at unification of selling the products and services together, right? what do the customers get? I mean, obviously, it's a significantly improved customer experience, as we talked about. But the more important thing is the maximization of revenue, because the services attachment rate is a problem. You don't know how you bundle your services that goes along with it. You don't know how your products, assets, or software as an asset, or a product, hardware product as an asset, and the services that goes along should be sold. So you are relying on tribal knowledge. If I'm a great salesperson, yeah, I do it all. If not, maybe I leave some money behind, right? So our software actually lets you configure and recommend all of the services that you should sell. Needless to say, because you're automating the entire motions of your product and services together, you get the accelerated sales cycle that comes along with it. So we are pretty sure that any companies out there which are selling software or which are selling hardware, which has a services component, in the next 6 months or more time to come, this will become like #1 priority for them to implement and unify how they sell product and services. So that's our #1 prediction. Okay. #2 is even more interesting, which is, the AI will rule the services quoting. Why? Most of the customers are trying to acquire and organize their data when it comes to services quoting. Like we said, 96% of the companies we talk to, they are on Excel spreadsheets. Now, nothing wrong with being on Excel spreadsheets. Excel is a great way to get started with something, but guess what? It doesn't scale. It doesn't give you organized way of you really looking at your data, doing anything meaningful with it, and really using all of that learning into your future coding, right? And so this is where, again, Provus comes in. We actually not only help companies acquire and organize all of that data, but where the future of services quoting will be is, how do I actually create a quote where I know my win probability? That's a simple use case. But how do I know what is my sold margin versus realized margin, and where am I falling short? Because you could be selling hundreds of deals and you could be losing 10% margins on that. But what's the point, right? Where is the learning? This is where our AI, our prediction for AI will rule the services quoting comes in, which is one of the last few enterprise areas where AI or the data organization hasn't happened. And Provus is a thought leader and enabler to make sure that not only we help companies acquire and organize this data, but also apply the AI to just even recommend what should be the ideal deal structure for a multi-year quote. And here is why, and here is how you should sell it. Here is your win probability, and here is how your resources should be organized. Here is how your scope should be arranged. All of that kind of stuff, right? So this is extremely critical. But like I said, you have to start first acquiring and organizing your data, and then only you can start analyzing and recommending. But we are seeing that trend already, and we will be utterly surprised if AI doesn't rule services quoting in the next 6 months to 12 months. The third prediction is really, offering and consuming services will only get more complex. What we mean by that is, and this is a chart which just shows like a scale agile. But if you are if you're a company which is consuming these services or going through the transformation, this is what your enterprise project is going to look like. That's the reality of life. Even if you're doing a point solution, the fact that your entire enterprise teams and all of the different departments have to be involved, this is ultimately what you will end up dealing with if you're consuming services. And if you're providing services, you have to play in this kind of complex architecture, both from a process perspective, people perspective, and environment perspective, right? And so, 15 years ago, there was a lot of talk about, hey, with all of these SaaS product companies coming in, maybe the services companies will, diminish or they won't have much of a business. And 15 years down the road, it's actually quite the opposite. All of the services companies are doing phenomenally well and growing. And the reason is the complexity and to be environmentally aware in terms of what you are dealing with, because it's not easy. If you're a company who is consuming or going through the transformation, it's not easy to just, hire like 1 or 2 vendors and 1 or 2 products and get it done. At the same time, if you are actually providing that service, it's not easy for you to really just say, okay, well, yeah, it's $1 million and we're done with it. It's not that simple, right? And so unless you actually adopt something like Provus for your entire services quoting need, unless you really try to be agile and nimble in terms of how you estimate, quote, and deal with the customers. I think you are going to be left behind. So the number 3 prediction here is really, it's going to be very, very complex as we go along, counterintuitive to how SaaS product and point solutions should, solve the problems. It does solve the problem, but when you think of it being environmentally aware, it actually gets very, very complex. So those are the 3 key predictions, Lindsey.
Awesome. Some very helpful and useful insight you have there. And thanks for sharing those predictions. So for companies that are still doing services quoting in Excel sheets or in other non-automated ways that you mentioned, what will the future look like for them? And what do they need to do to stay relevant in the market?
Yeah. And I think we have a lot of companies here. Some of them are our customers, some of them are exploring, but I'm going to make some bold statements here, which is, if you are a company which is selling any kind of services, like I said, you could be a software company, but has a software services component to it. You could be a hardware company, but has a recurring services component to it. Or you could be a consulting services company of any kind. I think if you fall into any of that category, and if you are stuck with, Excel-based processes and really not having consistency, longer sales cycles, you are not sure if there is a revenue leakage, but you're not sure where. I think the future of services quoting is really where I think these companies must get off of Excel's based processes, right? It's high time that you have to, no matter, irrespective of your size, really, you have to get off of Excel sheet, assuming that you are willing to grow and you are looking at the next stage of your growth, right? For all the reasons we talked about, which is being environmentally aware, irrespective of how and what kind of services you are providing, you have to be nimble and ready to really work on quoting multi-service, multi-location type of deals, right? Because that's the nature, the global distributedness, different kinds of services. So it's not about only implementation service. You may have to think about support service, education service, content service, managed service, right? All sorts of services, and you don't want to leave money on the table. But if you're not prepared to really organize, and what goes along with what kind of services, again, Excel is not a good kind of tool for that kind of stuff. You do need to think of sophistication to make sure that you can handle the multi-service type of quotings, right? Then as we talked about, must acquire and organize the services quoting data, right? First and foremost, I mean, unless and until you start organizing and acquiring all of that data in a meaningful way, you are not going to be able to enable the analytics, the AI, the future recommendation, all of that kind of stuff, right? And of course, I think you must automate and enable the lead to cash motion for services. I mean, whether for your own company or if you're doing transformation for the other companies, we talk about lead to cash motion for a lot of different ways, and predominantly we talk about the products or softwares being sold. But now the next decade is going to be all about, how do we enable the lead to cash motion for services? And that's really where Provus kind of comes in. Last but not least, really from a future of coding perspective, Lindsey, we believe that if the companies wants to stay relevant and stay ahead of the game, they have to really transform and kind of adopt the services quoting and make that as really number one priority, right? And with that, I'll just say this. I mean, we didn't talk too much about Provus, but we were super excited about the future of services quoting, the 3 predictions and stuff. But this is exactly where Provus comes in. We actually have a full-blown platform which solves the entire services quoting automation, right from your scope discovery that the salesperson starts engaging with, to all the way into getting your quote approved and activated, SOW signed and created, integration with the CRM, integration with the backend tools such as workforce management, PSA. But everything that happens in between that complex process is something that we at Provus basically automate, right? So that's the platform that we have, and we help customers really maximize the revenue, optimize the margins, and really accelerate the sales cycle.
Great. Tons of information you were able to share in a short amount of time. So thanks so much, Mahesh. We do just have 4 minutes now, so I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. We'll go ahead and ask those. But if we don't get to your question, it's all good. We'll make sure to follow up with you guys after. So first question, Mahesh, can your solution work alongside a product configuration centric CPQ solution?
Yeah, that's a good question. So answer is absolutely yes, right? The companies which are selling either hardware products or software, subscriptions, both of those require some sort of services. And like we were discussing earlier, this is where my number one prediction, which is the unification of how you sell products and services together. So yes, absolutely. Irrespective of what kind of product CPQ process that you have implemented and automated, our software actually works alongside with that and allows you to, carry that motion based on the personas, based on, how and what you are selling, but making sure that the services components are accurately scoped and estimated and quoted as you are actually going through the selling the product sales motion as well.
Got it. Makes sense. So another question is, what type of companies are using a solution like Provus?
Yeah, so there are different industry segments that we are that we are going after, and where we have customers who are using our solution. To name a few, consulting services companies, right? I mean, companies which are on the top end, like KPMG and Deloitte and Accenture of the world, but also a lot of companies in that mid-market to enterprise tier, which are predominantly doing consulting services of all sorts. They are the ones who are using our solution because they have to go through the end-to-end scope to code process. Professional services companies such as like Salesforce, Gainsight, companies which are selling software, but it requires services either through their own services or through the partner services. It requires services to enable their software and get on the adoption journey, right? And the third one is companies which are selling hardware, but those hardware has services component to it, right? Which is what we call the asset-based services as well. But then we have customers in pharmaceutical services, companies which are doing clinical trials, research and stuff like that, and it's a very methodical, very rigorous process that they go through, even when it comes to estimation and quoting and stuff like that. Very algorithmic way of how they estimate, and we have customers where we have automated that in the pharmaceutical services industry as well. The other one is transportation services and financial services. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we can actually help customers in any of those segments or other types of services where they are doing Excel-based processes.
Great. We just have 1 minute left, so we'll just finish up with one question. And again, if we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up with you afterwards. But can you leverage ML and AI for pricing?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So, and this is something that it's a multi-stage process. First of all, you have to acquire and organize your data. But where AI and ML comes in from a pricing standpoint is, what you are selling through the quoting process is how you sold the deal, what the scope was, what your sold margins were, what kind of resources you used, what were the locations, the pricing attributes. And then at some point in time, you are going to start tracking that as a project, assign resources, timesheets, how all of the task gets completed, where do you end up spending more time. What we do at Provus and where the AI ML comes in is, we basically bring your sold data and your actual realized data in a meaningful way, do all of the analysis, and start basically applying the AI ML technologies on top of that to tell you at the time of quoting, saying that, hey, you could be selling this deal at 45% margin, but you have done 100 of this and you haven't gotten more than 35% margin, right? And here is why, right? You are losing money on integration phase as an example, or you should use resources from different locations where you can maintain your top line but optimize your margins, all that kind of stuff, right? So absolutely, I think this is one of those last truly enterprise space where AI ML has a lot to do, but all of the data resides on Excel spreadsheet, which is what we are after. Our mission is to replace Excel spreadsheets in this entire services coding industry.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Mahesh. This will wrap up our webinar. So appreciate you sharing your insights and taking the time today, but also want to just thank all the participants. Thanks for joining. Thanks for asking some questions for us. But if there are any other questions, or if you even want to see a more in-depth demo of Provus, feel free to visit our website, or you can email us directly at contact@provusinc.com. And yeah, thank you all again for joining us, and hope to see you all on this, the next webinar.
Thank you.